now officially. I would like to welcome all the members who have logged in the visual mini plenary session. There will now be an opportunity for silent prayer or meditation. Thank you. Thank you. Honorable members, before we proceed, I would like to remind you that the visual mini plenary session is deemed to be in the precinct of Parliament and constitute a meeting of the National Assembly for debating purposes only. In addition to the rules of visual sittings, the rules of the National Assembly, including the rules of debate, apply. Members enjoy the same powers and privileges that apply in a sitting of the National Assembly. Members should equally note that anything said in the visual platform is deemed to have been said to the House and may be ruled upon. All members who have logged in shall be considered to be present and are requested to mute their microphones and only unmute when recognized to speak. This is because the mics are very sensitive and will pick up noise, which might disturb the attention of other members. When recognized to speak, please unmute your microphone, and where connectivity permits, connect your video. Members may make use of the icons on the bar at the bottom of their screens, which has an option that allows a member to put up his or her hand to raise points of order. The Secretariat will assist in alerting the chairperson to members requesting to speak. When using the visual system, members are urged to refrain or desist from unnecessary points of order or interjections. Lastly, I wish to remind you that we are meeting in a mini plenary session, and therefore any decisions will be taken in a full plenary session of the National Assembly. The first item on the order paper is a subject for discussion in the name of Honorable Shivambu on just energy transition in South Africa. Can I recognize Honorable Shivambu? Honorable Shivambu.
No, we have already communicated, Chair, that the Honorable Member Madokwe is going to be the one that leads the discussion.
No, that's fine.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's allow Honorable Madokwe. Honorable Madokwe.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm just having a bit of network problems, but I'm ready now.
Okay.
Thank you, House Chairperson. Chairperson, climate change continues to wreak havoc on many nations and economies across the world. There is no denying the monumental this will still have on this country and in the entire world. Our climate change mitigation and adaptation plans must, however, be based on a solid conceptual and practical foundation, and you must refuse to be used as pawns by the West in pursuit of goals that have nothing to do with us.
Any difficulty now? What is happening?
I think I still am experiencing some difficulties, Chair. I'm not sure what's happening with my gadget.
We can see
Let us
you.
switch off the video rather and then speak, because I'm not sure what's happening with the video. Apologies for that. Okay, I'll continue, Chair.
Yes.
Climate change is a global phenomenon, and those global powers contributing the most to greenhouse gas emissions must take more responsibility in reducing their gas emissions in order to prevent a global climate change apocalypse. South Africa is not even in the top 10 worst global emitters of greenhouse gases, but the attention of the world seems fixated on us and what we do. The main culprits of climate change are primarily the global north, which accounts for more than 2/3 of the world's emissions. These are countries such as Canada, US, Australia, and all European countries, especially Germany, which has postured itself as the darling of climate change advocacy. China, the United States, India, Russia, and Japan are the highest contributors of climate change. And the owners to cut carbon emissions and to fund such initiatives across the globe should be on them, and definitely not in the form of loans, as has been the case. We want to state it here upright that the decommissioning of coal power stations, the dramatic reduction on investments in coal, and the transition into the yet to be tested renewable sources of energy will surely plunge this economy into a crisis that the protagonists of this just transition could never imagine. Chair, the Presidential Climate Commission that was established in December 2020 published its framework for a just transition in South Africa, which outlined the key focal areas to transition South Africa from a fossil fuel dependent economy towards one that relies largely on renewable sources of energy. This framework anticipates that the country would heavily downsize its dependence on coal from 2025 to 2030, and that this would result in massive job losses, particularly in coal mining areas around Mpumalanga. The framework further anticipates that the transition away from coal will have major effects on the agricultural value chain, the motor industry value chain, as well as the tourism value chain. Despite this, no provisions are made for the kind of economic losses the country will be making as a result of this transition. No reliable alternatives for energy generation, and no consideration of the impact of this on our industrial development, which requires sustainable and reliable sources of energy. More concerning for us, however, is the boldness in which global financial institutions are dictating terms in this country under the guise of providing loans for the just transitions. Over the past few years, since Mr. Ramaphosa became president, there has been an aggressive attempt by global financial institutions to insert themselves into domestic politics of this country in an attempt to capture and dictate our economic policies. The World Bank has recently approved a 9 billion rand loan facility for Eskom to repurpose the Komati power station, which is basically a fancy word for the decommissioning of its power station without making means to replace the capacity to generate power loss because of this decommissioning. While understanding that the Komati power station had reached its stages of usefulness, the EFF views the intimate involvement of the World Bank and other global institutions in our country's so-called just transition with a huge sense of trepidation. Between 2018 and now, South Africa has received in excess of 30 billion rand in loans from the World Bank alone. This is over and above the over 65 billion rand loan the country got from the IMF in 2020. On the other hand, it is expected that South Africa will need more than $30 billion for transition to renewable energy. That is $30 billion worth of loans that our people will be expected to pay back with interest, loans that have detrimental conditions. History is littered with examples of ruined economies who thought flirting with IMF and World Bank economic structural adjustment programs, which are conditions for their loans, would solve their problems. Zimbabwe is an example of the ruinous effect of the World Bank's imposed structural adjustment programs. South Africa, under the spineless leadership of Ramaphosa, is plunging headfirst into this trap too, risking this country's sovereignty and burdening generations to come with debt burdens that were unnecessary to carry. At the COP26 in November last year, the president of the US, Joe Biden, shocked all of us when he announced that the US and the EU had agreed to help fund South Africa's transition away from coal into renewable sources of energy. Biden made this announcement while the US continues to raise their subsidies for fossil fuel exploitation. The US is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, and yet they are intent on helping us transition from coal instead of showing the world themselves how it ought to be done. Secondly, the West is intent on making South Africa a guinea pig as it experiments with transitioning away from reliable sources of energy to renewable sources of energy that have not sustained any economy anywhere in the world. The 10 biggest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world are continuing exploiting fossil fuels for their energy needs without making any significant cuts on their carbon emissions in order to meet global targets for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. To make any significant progress in fighting climate change, the biggest polluters must make the biggest cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. This is currently not the case, and the fixation with dramatically decommissioning coal-based power stations in South Africa will surely plunge this country into a power generation crisis and an economic calamity that Ramaphosa is unable to imagine at the moment. Eskom's plans to decommission a number of other coal-powered fire stations without replacing the coal generation capacity these power stations had is foolish as much as it is suicidal. Ramaphosa's own Presidential Climate Commission acknowledges that plans to cut the country's dependence on coal is going to lead to massive job losses and have a deleterious effect on the country's economy. South Africa has no reliable energy generating capacity other than coal, and the nuclear options that Ramaphosa is reluctant to pursue. The renewables now being punted as solutions to our energy challenges will not sustain any development in this country. Ramaphosa's short-sightedness will leave the country in serious financial and energy crisis that would take years to recover from. Just transition.
Yeah. There's a hand, Honorable Abrams. Can we allow? Yes, Honorable Abrams.
Yes, Honorable Chair, it's a point of order.
Yes.
Yes, Honorable Chair.
Yeah.
The member keeps referring to the president as Ramaphosa, and she should know that in terms of the rules, the members should be referred to as Mr. or Honorable. Thank you, Chair.
My adopted one is what 14.
I don't know now who is speaking. I allowed Honorable Abrams to speak, and my assumption is that that is known to the honorable member, that this is how you refer to honorable members. Can you please do that? Let's proceed. Honorable Madokwe, are you still on the platform? It looks like we have lost Honorable Madokwe. Are you still on the platform?
I am still on the platform, Chair.
Yes, I think you have noted the point of order in terms of how we refer to members in the House. They are either referred to as Mr. or Honorable. I think let's respect that. Can you continue?
Thank you, Chair. It is noted. Can I continue?
Yes, yes, please. Continue. You have only 1 minute left. Honorable Madokwe, are you able?
Yes, I am here, Chair.
Yes, proceed.
Thank you, House Chairperson. In essence, what is considered South Africa's just transition all about? It's about plunging us into darkness and our economy into a crisis never seen before. The end goal is that at the end, we must hand over our sovereignty as a country into the hands of a few white business people, who will then take charge of the country's energy needs and leave the majority without access to power. The president's pact with big businesses and with Western global powers on the just transition process has very little to do with us and much to do with the interests of global capital. South Africa, as we have said before, has no reliable energy generating capacity other than coal. And therefore, the conversation on just transition should mainly be about an energy mix that considers the use of coal, the use of nuclear, and the use of energy generation, such that it is not about the surrendering of coal energy generation, which we know will ultimately plunge our country and our economy into darkness. In closing, Chairperson, we condemn this selling of our country by Eskom, enabled by Ramaphosa's regime. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I hope we will not continue to, when there's ruling, to say you note and you say you noted, to continue to refer to honorable members in the way you have referred. I am also talking to other members. Honorable Mashaule of the ANC, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. The ANC-led government's approach to the just energy transition is more intent on reaching a compromise between the renewable and non-renewable sources of energy generation, as evidenced in the Integrated Resource Plan promulgated in 2019. The IRP 2019, as a country's electricity infrastructure development plan, not only serves as a blueprint for the just energy transition, but equally important, it ensures that the just energy transition reflects the long-term development goals of the country as outlined in the National Development Plan, wherein access of electricity that is environmentally sustainable at affordable tariffs is one of the core elements of a decent standard of living. Simply put, the ANC-led government rejects any form of a just energy transition that is both disembedding of the IRP 2019 and incapable of bringing a decent standard of living to ordinary South Africans as outlined in the NDP. Therefore, anyone who thinks like the EFF that the just energy transition in South Africa follows incorrect policies and strategies imposed on the country by Western superpowers, in part because they are too powerful for the ANC-led government to challenge, is either that their reality is stranger than fiction, or they remain faithful to their stereotyped views. Chairperson, the implementation of a just energy transition is a process premised on a series of sequential steps rather than an instantaneous change. The process-driven implementation of a just energy transition helps the country to deploy the better strategies and policies available to redress the growing imbalances between energy access and energy affordability on the one hand, and security of the supply of electricity and environmental protection on the other hand. Several steps are essential to this process of implementing the just energy transition. The first step has been completed by the unbundling of Eskom into 3 divisions responsible for generation, transmission, and distribution. The unbundling of Eskom seeks to ensure that competition takes place throughout the generation and distribution networks while retaining the transmission network as a natural monopoly. More importantly, the unbundling of Eskom is a catalyst to the just energy transition as it guarantees the high level of entry by IPPs to increase and complement the coal-generated energy through multiple renewable carriers, while at the same time driving down electricity tariffs so that the transition can deliver on its stated objectives. So the unbundling of Eskom is not a code for privatization, but rather an attempt to introduce economic efficiency improvements alongside balancing environmental impacts and socio-economic consideration. In essence, the EFF's hype about the privatization of Eskom is, well, just that, a hype. It is from this point of view that the EFF's pet hobby of accusing the ANC-led government of seeking to privatize Eskom should be interpreted as an alibi for pure fiction rather than the means to discover the truth. Therefore, the position of the EFF on just energy transition remains a very important reason to invest in education so that members of this party can break with stereotype narratives rather than further develop a fiction belonging to a comic book that they normally would refer to. The second step has also been completed by introducing amendments to the Electricity Regulation Act and the electricity pricing policy to incentivize competition and deliver electricity at a regulated competitive prices that are cost reflective. Of course, the ANC-led government is aware that the unbundling process has had unpopular outcomes, such as the drafting and swallowing of national utilities by capital intensive IPPs and electricity price increases set by market forces, especially in countries like the United Kingdom. So the Electricity Regulation Act and the electricity pricing policies are set out to make sure that this time around, the unbundling process, such as the one in the United Kingdom, cannot be exactly replicated in the context of South Africa because countries are not homogeneous, and therefore their just energy transition paths will be dissimilar due to varying local conditions. Unlike the unbundling process in the United Kingdom, the unbundling of Eskom incentivizes competition with electricity tariff controls to retain the subsidization of electricity to poorer end users because the ANC-led government remains committed to reversing the historical injustices of the past that manifest in our society through the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, as well as the historical exclusion of the Black majority from the economy. In essence, if the EFF still think that the just energy transition in South Africa is implemented not in the public interest, but Western superpowers' interest, then there's no point in discussing this debate any further because it is exhausting to enlighten somebody who refuses to take off their rose-tinted glasses and realize that the transition is responsive to the people's need rather than cultivating nefarious agendas. The third step is to decarbonize the electricity sector. However, what is important is recognizing that decarbonizing the electricity sector does not imply that energy generation will be largely dependent on renewable energy sources to the detriment of coal. But this should not be interpreted as the ANC-led government reneging on its commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions per the binding international treaties and or agreements. The reality is that substituting coal-fired power stations with renewable energy sources in the short to medium term will bring the security of the supply of electricity and the economy desperate for recovery on the cusp of vulnerability. To be sure, while renewable energy carriers such as wind, solar, hydropower, gas, and biomass are associated with economies of scale and scope, as well as innovation and economic efficiency improvement, the power system in the country does not have the requisite storage capacity to overcome the intermittency nature of the availability. In other words, if the requisite capacity for energy storage was available, the ANC-led government would rationally fast-track the phasing out of coal-fired power stations over the next 10 years to accommodate the entry of renewable energy carriers. As such, renewable energy carriers are less likely to provide baseload power and thus have limited effect on sustaining the energy-intensive economy of the country on their own. Regardless, Renewable energy carriers are the best option to match the peak demand. They are also useful sources of providing energy in remote areas, in part because of the high cost of transmitting electricity from the grid to remote areas. Despite all their potential, renewable energy carriers cannot match the impact of coal on energy generation and the economy broadly. With significant investment in efficient clean coal technologies, the country can exploit coal in an environmentally responsible manner and subsequently deploy its highest value use to save the jobs and key strategic industries that depend on it, as well as realize the priority interventions of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan. More importantly, the country has invested quite a lot in building Medupi and Kusile power stations, and therefore any form of the just energy transition that does not permit the ANC-led government to be fully compensated for bearing the cost of building these power stations will be politically, socially, and economically unsustainable. To conclude, the EFF's over-enthusiasm with the just energy transition must be tamed, not only because the party is playing second fiddle on the concept conceptualized by the ANC-led government, but also because expecting the EFF to implement a viable alternative to just energy transition is like asking too much. And this may lead us to lending in a vault of the VBS bank rather than at the green energy power plant, which is designed to increase generation capacity. I thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can we now ask Honorable Miller of the DA? The platform is yours.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. At the outset, we need to acknowledge a few realities. Reality number one, rolling blackouts have been with us for 14 years, and we are no closer today to resolving them than we were in 2007 when they first emerged. In fact, one could go so far as to say that we are actually in a far worse situation now than we were then because of the sheer mismanagement of our energy policy. Reality number two, Eskom has admitted that it would require an investment of 990 billion rand in new generation to resolve our electricity crisis. This is money they admit they don't have and cannot afford to borrow, which means it has to come out from outside of Eskom and outside of government. And that means independent power producers. Reality number three, our people are already enormously affected by climate change and harmful emissions. Just ask the people of KwaZulu-Natal about their ongoing problems arising from the floods last year, or the children of Mpumalanga who suffer respiratory ailments because of the enormous amount of harmful emissions pumped out by Eskom's coal-fired power stations. Reality number four, South Africa has international commitments in terms of the Paris Agreement, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and various loan agreement conditions, all of which place a huge obligation on the country to reduce our carbon emissions. And reality number five, even if we wanted to ignore everything I have just said, the fact of the matter is that it would take too long to build new coal or new nuclear power plants. We have seen with the construction of Medupi and Kusile, neither of which is fully operational or up to scratch in terms of technical standards or emission control requirements, that it would take in the region of 15 years for Eskom to build plants like these. So where does that leave us? If we are to truly address the energy and electricity needs of this country, then we need to accelerate the building of new generation capacity. If we accept that Eskom cannot do this, then we must look to independent power producers to invest, build, and operate this generation. We know that there is no appetite, either amongst power companies or financial institutions, to build fossil fuel power generation, which therefore means that we must look to renewables, wind, solar, hydro, to create electricity solutions for South Africa. A just energy transition, in other words, a move from the current status quo of primarily nuclear and coal generation to an electricity sector dominated by renewable energy solutions, must, however, take into account the impact on the socio-economic circumstances of those most affected. In a strict, limited reading of who this affects, we would be talking about the Eskom workers, the coal miners, and the coal transporters, and the communities they support and live in. But a more realistic and inclusive interpretation includes every single South African. It includes communities who suffer without electricity for days on end because of rolling blackouts. It includes children whose lungs are clogged with harmful carbon emissions. It includes the economy and the rampant unemployment and lack of economic growth, which has resulted from this government's go slow on the adoption of renewable solutions. We must ask ourselves, is it truly just to leave people suffering in cold and darkness because this government hasn't done its job? We need to bring more electricity online now, not in 15 years' time. A real just energy transition is one that builds new generation capacity quickly, efficiently, and cost effectively. It is one that looks at the greater good of the people of South Africa, not the limited selfish needs of the few who are directly part of the status quo that currently exists. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can we now recognize Honorable Zondo of the IFP? Honorable Zondo.
Honorable Chairperson, attaining
Yeah.
a just energy transition in the current chaotic post-COVID world will be a great deal more challenging than the scenario and action plans that were outlined by the government before 2020. Socio-economic and political factors have changed the considerable and a multiplicity of challenges having compound upon themselves. What is important when considering our transition to a just and sustainable energy supply future is that we ensure that we do not set ourselves up for failure with unrealistic solutions to the current energy crisis and transition. Honorable Chairperson, are we confident that our models are in fact correct? Will they provide us with the energy security we require? Will the new energy supply be reliable and sustainable? Can we afford to implement this model? If we cannot afford this, what are we doing to open up the energy supply spaces to private foreign investment and encourage foreign direct investment, which will speed up the transition, create more employment, skill transfer, and importantly, supply energy demand? Additionally, will our current energy supply infrastructure even operationally for long enough to see us through the transition, which will take years? The solution to this, once again, is to open the space to private enterprises, Honorable Chairperson. Our Honorable President advised us that he attended COP27 last week in Egypt, and that South Africa was in a strong position. As we had recently adopted a just transition framework to guide our national approach to this process. With due respect to the Honorable President, how could such a document possibly place us in a strong position? This is when we have a public sector administration that is not only incapable of performing due to the quarter century of cadre deployment, trampling our democracy for positions that require specific skills and training, but additionally an administration that is driven by corruption and self-interest. Unless and until this government corrects its criminal behavior through serious consequence management for corrupt activity, commit itself to transparency and accountability, and open the energy supply mix space to private enterprises, we will not only have no just energy transition, we will still have no energy. Chairperson, South Africa's great currency crisis is that of unemployment. This can only be curbed by attracting private and foreign investment. As the IFP, we urge the government to immediately and correctly open this energy supply space to private sectors. Historically, clear shows that this government has been a poor allocator of capital. Allow the private sector to invest, which will provide both jobs and service to affordable rates through health marketing competition. Chairperson, this government will not only be defined by what is created, but also by that which is refused to destroy. ESCOM must go. It has failed and continues at great taxpayers' expense to unjust fail the people of South Africa. I thank you.
Thank you very much. We now call upon Honorable Meshwe of the ACDP. Honorable Meshwe. Reverend Meshwe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I apologize, I have challenges with the network, yes, sir.
Okay.
But hey,
We can see you, we can hear you.
all right. The ACDP wishes to caution government against rushing the decommissioning of Eskom's coal mines and coal-fired power plants, such as the megawatts Komati power station near Mpumalanga, which will lead to many job losses. I'm certain that many members of this house went to school from money our parents made from selling magwenya on street corners. As children, we would wake up at home in the morning to find our mother gone to sell magwenya at 5 a.m. Now that we are members of parliament, we cannot just ignore the fact that there are still many thousands of people in our country whose income depends on sales of magwenya, chicken dust, roast mealies, and etc. that depend on coal fire made on street corners. The ACDP has taken note that Cabinet has approved an initial investment plan for an $8.5 billion package to accelerate the country's transition away from coal and towards clean energy, and that an additional 10 billion rands will be made available. A staggering further 1.5 trillion rands is planned over the next 5 years. What we want to know about this 1.5 trillion rands funding, which represents a third of the present public debt of 4.7 billion rands, will apparently be made available through a combination of concessional loans, grants, investments, and risk-sharing instruments. This will be a massive debt that this country, we believe, cannot afford. We do not want to be slaves of our lenders. Have we learned nothing from the extensive corruption in the building of the coal-fired power plants, Kusile and Medupi? Will they now be decommissioned? The ACDP demands transparency on where and how these funds are going to be spent and what safeguards will be in place to prevent fraud and corruption, and most importantly, who and how will these funds be repaid? While the president has repeatedly said that he would only accept a deal that offered good terms based on grants and concessional funding that aligns with national development goals, including debt reduction and job creation, the ACDP is deeply concerned about reports as to how much of the funds will be delivered as grants, with the rest split between concessional and commercial loans. As I said earlier, these additional loans will undoubtedly add to the country's already high debt burden and heighten the risk of a sovereign debt crisis. International finance experts have also correctly questioned whether these packages offer the country better terms than it can already access on local and international financial markets.
Your time is up, Honorable Meshwe. Thank you. Can we now call upon a member of the UDM? UDM? It looks like they are not there. ATM? ATM? They are also not there. Can we now move to DA, Honorable Phillips? Honorable Phillips.
Thank you, Chair. A just transition is a phrase that has become a bit like the fourth IR phrase of 2019. Will the results be as dismal, or will the governing party finally do the right thing for our country, our people, and our future? The poorest of our people are people who live closest to the coal-fired power stations. These are the people whose quality of life will be improved by a transition to green energy. Weaning our country of dirty energy will not happen overnight. There's plenty of time for coal miners to be gradually retrained in the new renewable energy sector, especially considering our energies ministers penchant for procrastination. A funded transition to green energy is the golden opportunity for our people and our country. If only we can grab the opportunity with both hands and pass it on to those who are affected by load shedding, pollution, and job losses. We cannot allow the greedy fat cats and the tender entrepreneurs to get their hands on the money, as we saw happening with the COVID relief funds. Job losses are already a reality, not due to the transition to green energy, but due to load shedding, aging infrastructure, and a government that chooses to procrastinate while our country literally burns due to climate change. Our wildfires have never ranged as far, burnt as long, or as hot as they do now. Less than a month ago, we experienced devastating wildfires in the Northwest Province. Brave South Africans lost their lives. Animals died in excruciating pain. Their twisted and charred remains photographed and the images shared on social media. Flooding, just like fire, has ravaged not only our country, but many other countries around the world. Global warming, yes, say the majority. No, say some, just a theory. My question to South Africans and the world is, are you willing to bet the future of your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren on your opinion when there is a better alternative? Is the alternative perfect? No, by no means. Our world will, however, continue to die if we don't change, and that change begins with you. I challenge anyone who is in favor of maintaining the status quo of dirty energy to live in the coal belt for 12 months. Better yet, move in with a family who've lived there for a while. Point to a residential area on the map, choose a house, and the chances are 1 in 4 that you'll end up living with a family who has members suffering from acute asthma. Listening to a person with asthma is almost as traumatic as actually having asthma. Every breath they take, you want to actually breathe for them because it's a struggle. This is not some unseen effect on the environment that might affect your grandchildren, as many will have us believe. This is the daily reality for at least 113,000 residents living near coal-fired power stations. If we do not change, we will continue to spend billions of rand annually, which our country cannot afford,
Time
on
up,
helping
honorable
people
member.
affected by dirty power generation.
Your
European-
time is up, honorable member. Sorry, your time is up.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I now call Honorable Boshoff of the FF Plus? Honorable
Thank you.
Boshoff. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable House Chair, the world as we know it presently is inconceivable without fossil fuels. The pre-modern world mainly used biological energy obtained from plants, animals, and humans, very often slaves, for sustenance and trade. A realization that the pressure built up by steam could turn the world around nearly drove European forests to extinction. Then fossil fuels came to the rescue, dirty and difficult to excavate, but abundant and effective. 2 additional technologies followed: the internal combustion engine and electricity. The sky seemed to be at the limit, and in fact it was. Long before fossil fuels became exhausted, the Earth's atmosphere was so profoundly altered that climate change causes a real threat to life as we know it. That is history. Now economy. The economy is not the sum of money spent, but the sum of energy exercised. Add more money to the economy and you get inflation. Add energy and you get growth. Cut the country's money flow, then something else will flow. But cut the energy supply and the country is screwed. Since 1924, South Africa was governed by the mantra South Africa first. We didn't have oil, but we have lots of coal. So we did everything possible with coal and a few more. Without the economic foundations of Eskom, Transnet, and Sasol, there would not have been much of a state to capture and very little to expropriate without compensation. Now the social reality. Whole society is constituted around coal mining, generation of electricity, and manufacturing of fluid fuels. The balance of what was needed in this regard is important. In the time of sanctions, when the ANC attempted to destroy what they were about to receive, nuclear was also developed. While coal power stations fail, we are thankful about that. Just a pity it looks like failing too. In the process, a whole country was strung together by wires, electrical wires. Therefore, the expression to cut somebody's water and lights if the person is functionally annihilated. Two possible calamities struck the South African economy at approximately the same time. Scientific opinion leaned towards a conclusion that burning of fossil fuels alters the Earth's climate. Americans on the right and South Africans on the left deny it, but that's the opinion on which international decisions are made and which I incidentally share. Also, the ANC took a political decision not to invest in additional power generation, and certain elements captured what was left of coal and of generation. So exactly when everybody says we should abandon coal, we lose the ability to hang on to it. Fortunately, a third thing happened. Renewables became competitive. This time, the state won't be the driver of the new energy dispensation like it was a century ago. It simply does not have the ability. But now, we have a much stronger private sector providing finance and knowledge for transition at its own time. Small modular nuclear generation units might well provide the baseload. The wide east-west spread of the country assists with the renewable sources, whether solar or wind. A well-maintained grid is a huge plus. The exact mix will not be determined by a state-determined plan, but by private citizens, communities, and the commercial sector. It seems the president realized that, but maybe not the minister, and also maybe not the EFF. This will have consequences for a centralized unitary state. As the state's ability deteriorates, it will have less power. Political power will vest in communities who look after themselves, as it should. The new power generation will create power for a new generation. That is a just transition, I think.
Thank you. Can we now call Honorable Mkhwanazi of the ANC?
Malbongwe.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Honorable Chairperson, I must emphasize from the beginning that the just energy transition in South Africa is a deliberate process of consent rather than coercion. I am raising all this, Honorable Chairperson, because the EFF is enslaved to their theory that the United Nations Conference of Parties, COP, on climate change is not built upon social bargain where countries convince each other on the best possible approach to reach the net zero climate target, but rather it embraces the expectations of power dynamics of multilateral deal making. In other words, Chairperson, the industrialized Western countries use soft and hard power to define the strategies of policy practices of the just energy transition, and the ANC-led government has to live with the results, or rather toe the line. Therefore, members of the ANC participating in this debate as the leader of society, just to give a free lessons, are here to help disguise the selfish interest of the industrialized Western countries advanced by the ANC-led government. This EFF theory is self-defeating because the ANC resisted the oppressive regime of colonization and apartheid before and never abandoned its policy autonomy in favor of the narrow selfish interest of any foreign countries. Honorable Chairperson, even Mr. Shivambu and others as the graduate or in the political studies knows that where there is power, there is resistance. But I'm not sure if Mr. Malema of the EFF knows about this, even though he's the graduate also in the political studies. So let us forget about the EFF because its theory seeks to imprint progress made on the just energy transition based on the principles of opposing. Honorable Chairperson, the just energy transition is a concept that is developed and advanced not by the opposition parties, but by the ANC-led government to address several critical social economy objectives to ensure the development of South African economy. Amongst other objectives, the just energy transition intend to increase is the South African generation capacity within the concept of growth in demand of electricity and coal power plants which have reached the end of their life cycle. Hence, Honorable Chairperson, the just energy transition enables the ANC government to pursue aggressively the energy mix dependent on the coal generation capacity as well as other multiple sources of energy, of clean energy, such as renewables, gas, hydropower, and nuclear. Chairperson, the energy mix approach is important primarily because South African economy is energy intensive, and therefore the base load cannot come from a single energy source, such as renewables, as the DA would like us to believe. The reduction in carbon emission is critically important in South Africa, as major carbon emission impacts negatively on the health of many communities and also resulted in climate change. The impact of this climate change has not spared South Africa, as we recently witnessed the devastating floods in KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga, northwestern part of Eastern Cape. Consequently, this results in the people and communities bearing the high cost, and the needs to it needs to be taken seriously. Hence, the just energy transition is important in this regard. Honorable Chairperson and honorable members, the implementation of the just energy transition has the potential to address the current energy poverty, which the apartheid system inflicted on the majority of our people. Since 1994, the ANC-led government has commenced on electrification program to ensure that the majority of the population has access to electricity at the affordable, cheapest prices. However, the Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy is facing barriers to electrify the remaining backlog because the remaining households to be electrified are especially populated rural areas and densely packed shacks that are unsafe to connect to the grid. Despite all these formidable hurdles, the just energy transition can supply energy through multiple carriers at the cheapest possible prices to those rural and subsequently catalyze transformation in such communities. Honorable Chairperson, the just energy transition is not pursued for its own sake, but to promote energy security that is environmentally friendly and aim at benefiting workers and communities. To be sure, the just energy transition seeks to ensure the development of new industrial sectors in terms of green energy, gas, and hydropower. These new sectors will have a spillover effect on other sectors such as services and manufacturing. Most importantly, the just energy transition presents opportunities for the reskilling and retraining of workers in the affected areas, including coal mining areas, especially in the Mpumalanga province. Through the implementation of the renewable energy development zones, the implementation of the renewable energy development zones is aimed at ensuring that there will be no ghost towns for the coal mining areas, because the ANC-led government, the caring ANC-led government approach to the just energy transition is based on the balance of evidence and energy security, as well as ensuring job creation and microeconomic development. For instance, renewable energy development zones will facilitate further local economic development through the exploitation of multiple renewables, with a special focus on the development and transformation of coal mining areas and communities. Moreover, the repurposing of coal-fired power plants will retain some important jobs in the coal mining sector to the benefit of the people around that areas. The implementation of the 2019 Energy Roadmap by the Department of Public Enterprise is geared towards achieving this goal by conducting reliable maintenance at some of the aging coal-fired power plants, while ensuring that Medupi and Kusile are functional. This is not based on the privatization of Eskom, but rather on expanding the different multiple sources of energy to achieve greater energy security through public and private partnership, as outlined in the Just Energy Transition. So what the EFF does not understand is that privatization or complete state ownership does not provide a developmental solution to energy security or ensure economic growth. Therefore, Honorable Chairperson, the EFF's approach to the just energy transition is a recipe for disaster, and it is not technically sound, and it only elevates newspapers' narratives to the level of political principles rather than the actual articulation of a plan. Therefore, Honorable Chairperson, the only thing which can be trusted from the EFF is the quality of the cloth from which they are red overalls manufactured, and nothing else, as it lacks a coherence and sound policies on the just energy transition. Honorable Chairperson, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Well done.
Now is the turn for the NFP, Honorable Sheikh Imam. Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes.
The NFP is in support of a just energy transition. But I think we need to ask the obvious questions, Chairperson. First of all, we do not have enough energy supply in the country. Yes, we have a problem as far as global warming. We can't run away from it. But does it make sense, Chairperson, to go out there and shut your current power station when you do not have the capacity to be able to provide adequate energy to the country? Now, the mistake we made 20 years ago, we're making it again. And even when we are planning, we're planning based on the needs of today, not in 10 years' time when it's actually going to be. Now, let me talk about coal alone. The Richards Bay coal terminal, and I know many people talk about Russia and Ukraine and the negative aspect and how it's affecting the economic growth in South Africa, but nobody is talking about the fact that from 700, that over 720% increase, that is from 500,000 tons, you've gone to 4.1 million tons of coal that was exported to Europe alone, and the revenue that's coming in as a result of that. Now, no one is talking about over 100,000 minimum indirect jobs that would be lost in Mpumalanga province alone as a result of the so-called just energy transition, where you're moving from one extreme to the other extreme. Not a process, but an extreme, one extreme to the other. Over 100,000. Look at the burden on the taxpayers in this country, already sitting at 4.7 trillion debt. This 151 billion, most of it is borrowings, which is going to add to the burden Eskom already has of over 400 billion rand in debt. Now, what we're saying is what should happen is while you maintain this and build more power stations, simultaneously you can look at renewable energy. But given the history of state-owned entities in this country, I think we are more guaranteed than not that there will be very little chances of success in whatever we do, because everything's failed. Now, that is the concern that is being raised currently, and whether the renewable energy will be able to meet the demand. But when you have a mix of both, indeed, you will be able to meet the demand. But more important, what is going to happen to all these coal mining towns? What is going to happen to all those communities? It's going to become ghost town. Do we have the capacity to incorporate them into any other sector as far as jobs are concerned, with the high unemployment rate that we have in this country? Are we not considering that? Or are we going for the bait that was given by the West with this 151 billion? So we have a serious concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Now is the AIC, Honorable Jafta.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Chairperson, the discussion in South Africa about a just energy transition is often shallow and decontextualized. Firstly, it doesn't help to demarcate an artificial binary between coal and renewables in the process of marshalling country's energy transition. That is the wrong premise. We should remind members that South Africa is a signatory to a raft of international treaties. We have committed ourselves to the targets of the Kyoto Protocol in 2002 and those of the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference held in 2009. We also hosted COP17 in Durban in 2011. The concessions made in 2009 in Copenhagen, for instance, were clear that a reduction of 43% in carbon dioxide emission by 2025 by nation states must be achieved. The recent climate conference in Egypt is on course to try to hammer on nation states to honor these commitments. Therefore, the debate about just energy transition must be context specific and consistent with our climate change obligations. This does not mean, Honorable Chair, that we are not mindful of the far-reaching consequences of a just transition to job security and social equity in coal-mined communities. It is common cause that the National Integrated Resource Management Plan places coal at the center of our country's generation capacity. The plan reveals persistency on the role of fossil fuel, and coal is said to contribute 46% to the country's electricity generation capacity by 2030. This leaves the debate about just transition in limbo. To avert this calamity, there is a greater need to diversify our energy sources and progressively switch to clean energy. This requires continued investment in clean coal and ultimately the phasing out of fossil fuel. This would require the upskilling of coal mine former employees to adapt to new technologies. Regrettably, what we have here had in South Africa is a necessary concern, is not necessarily concerns over job losses, but attempts by government to use Eskom as a BEE patrimonial guinea pig, in which case Eskom disbursing of lucrative coal contracts to BEE consortiums is flattened as a transformation tool in the energy sector. We need to dump this orientation and cast Eskom anew. I thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you. Can we now ask Cope? Cope? Let's move to the next. PAC. PAC. Then the next speaker is Al Jama. Honorable Hendricks, over to you. Honorable Hendricks. Can I assume as well that Honorable Hendricks is not in the platform? Can we move to Honorable Kachalia of the DA? Honorable Kachalia.
Thank you, Chair. The biggest injustice around electricity in South Africa is that we don't have enough of it, and it is too expensive. Elevation out of poverty is predicated on the availability of electricity. Our just transition should be a transition from an electricity poor to an electricity abundant society. And that means affordable electricity should be available in every home and every workplace for business to create jobs now. That is why we need a stable baseload, while generation from other multiple sources of supply kick in on a source agnostic, lowest cost basis while we explore the most suitable, least invasion and energy dense solution. We must leverage what we have in hand and focus in parallel on what we can alternatively and impactfully implement over a sensible time frame. Yes, the just energy transition, JET's vision, focuses on achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050 with an increase in sustainable jobs involving increasing our share of renewable energy storage, grid strengthening, and the repurposing of our coal fleet. But it is not today's panacea. It is tomorrow's cautious project. Remember that during COP26 in Glasgow, India was opposed to harsh targets on phasing out coal, still amongst the key sources of energy for developing nations. It pushed to introduce equity and safeguards on fossil fuel subsidies for the poor, following which the text in the final pact was reworded. The current question on everyone's lips is, why has load shedding not been fixed after 15 years? In the face of ongoing and debilitating load shedding, the need to transition sensibly, we need to understand that reliable energy power needs to be dispatchable, and we need to plan accordingly for both smaller scale and utility scale augmentation. If you were to replace 1,600 megawatts lost at Kusile and Medupi with renewables, we would need 5,000 megawatts, because from 100 megawatts of nameplate renewables, you only get a 30% capacity factor. So we need a reliable interim solution while we explore alternatives and push for the deregulation of energy and the accommodation of IPPs. Battery storage is key to the new generative augmentation, but multiple thousands of megawatts of renewable energy need thousands of megawatts of battery storage. Elon Musk's historical storage facility in Australia, the largest globally, is tiny by comparison, with a capacity of 129 megawatt hours, and significant augmentation will need governments there to kick in 2050. So it's going to be a while before this morphs into utility scale solutions, and load shedding must be fixed now. Given that South Africa will need 1.4 trillion over the next 5 years to transition to an economy that's heavily dependent on coal-generated energy, does South Africa have the time and the fiscal space? South Africa's JET is said to be the first of its kind globally in both scale and ambition, and sees itself as a leading player in the new carbon global economy. That's all very well, but let's learn to walk before we can run, and that involves keeping the lights on, lest we fall in the darkness. I thank you.
Thank you very much. We now recognize the Minister for Mineral Resources and Energy. Over to you, Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson of the House. Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, Deputy Speaker, Ministers and Deputy Ministers on the platform, members of the House. I have an option to be derailed and focus on the insults held by Honorable Madokwe, Spineless Ramaphosa, or embrace what Honorable Mailam throws as a solution, renewable energy as a seed. I opted out of both. Just energy transition debate is complex and contested as a terrain in which countries across the globe seek to advance their own national interests. So there's nothing like an innocent debate, whether it is in Egypt now or in the House now. We are looking for advancing our national interests. The world is grappling with this concept in Egypt as we sit here today. These differences, among others, pertain to the common and differential commitments regarding emission targets, in which contest on how to transition also reflect the North-South divide. The approach to transition reflects this divide. Whereas differences of opinion on how our country should transition have arisen over the years, there's one common consensus that is about moving from high to low carbon emissions. We all agree on that, rather than moving from coal to renewables. There is no such an agreement because the upright abandoning of fossil fuels is dangerous. We accept that transition is a journey, not an event. It is a journey that must be just, carried by justice, which must be seen to be done, not only justice pronounced. It should be people-centered approach, talk about people, not just numbers. When you talk about people in the coal belt, it is human beings staying in that belt. It must be take into consideration socio-economic condition of communities that will be affected. The 10 towns that are in the coal belt, without including Standerton, Vereeniging, and Lipalale, are communities that should be looked into. Therefore, the issue of alternative economic activity is important and take into consideration our country's developmental needs. In other words, we must not be made guinea pigs. I have noticed that Honorable Madogwe stole this expression, where developed economies use us for experimenting. This must happen at a pace and scale that our country can afford. The pressure to abandon coal instantly must be resisted and opt for a systematic step-by-step transition that we can afford. Our transition cannot only be about reaching climate change targets, it must also address energy poverty, which includes lack of access to the energy. At this point in time, we are not having universal access to energy. We should address that issue. Two, energy should not be expensive. When there is a proposal for 30% increase in tariffs, that is contributing to energy poverty. And electricity interruptions or load shedding is a sign of energy poverty. Hence, a combination of energy technologies established in the IRP 2019 becomes the most reliable solution to addressing energy poverty while transitioning to a low carbon economy. We ought to guarantee base load energy supply through a combination of gas, nuclear, coal, hydro. A pendulum swing from coal to powered energy generation to renewable energies does not guarantee a base load stability. It will sink the country into a base load crisis, which we are witnessing today, as we currently experience. Because if Eskom is having just over 20,000 megawatts that are not decommissioned but not giving us energy, that means that is where the crisis is. And as we focus on that, we should resolve that crisis and then deal with the load shedding. And then we'll know that the renewable energies are important for medium to long-term energy supply. The work done by Council for Geoscience in a collaboration with the World Bank on carbon capture, utilization and storage give us hope and believe that coal will continue to play a critical part in our just energy transition. Therefore, any suggestion that coal has reached its sell-by date is a myth. Hence, our coal exports have increased over 700% since the geopolitical conflict in Russia-Ukraine. Our country is endowed with critical minerals and other fossil fuels, which must be exploited for the benefit of the people of South Africa. This should not be construed as undermining our commitment to global decarbonization agenda, a signatory of the Paris Agreement, for an example. Honorable members, our country is witnessing a rapid growth of private sector energy investment through independent power producers. This has been witnessed through the procurement of additional energy under renewable energy IPP procurement program for build window 5 and 6. Just today, we signed power purchase agreements with at least 3 IPPs under build window 5, which will add over 300 megawatts to the national grid once completed in the next 12 to 18 months. We intend to be signing PPAs with other preferred bidders under this window. But what we should not forget is that in 1998, 96, 98, when we were warned of the exhaustion of the energy surplus, we all were told to believe that the private sector will provide and buy that additional capacity. It's a risk that we must avoid because this is a public good. The state must continue playing its role in actually ensuring that people have access to this public good. Hence the talk of the Generation 2, which should be a public entity that continues to develop capacity of base load capacity. It must therefore be clear that ESCOM is not for sale. It remains country's base load energy generator. This aggregation of ESCOM into 3 utility generation distribution forms part of our plan to secure energy supply to society. The amendments of Electricity Regulation Act and electricity pricing policy are aimed at enabling competitive market for electricity generation in the country and drive affordable through fair competition. You must remember that once you establish transmission as a market and a wheeler of energy, you are actually allowing competition there. Africa is the least polluter of the environment, yet it is the most affected country by climate change. Therefore, it is incumbent upon all of us and on developing nations in particular, which historically benefited from industrial economic activity that polluted the world, resulting in climate change, to finance our transition appropriately and adequately. Therefore, the funding must respond to our program, including ending energy poverty, improving our energy infrastructure, and thereby ensuring baseload supply, repurposing of some of our energy generation facilities. For example, I don't think the issue should be decommissioning coal power stations. It should be repurposing others, replace coal turbines with gas turbines, and continue generating an equal capacity or more of energy. Investment in carbon capture, utilization and storage, and other mitigating technologies, skills development and technology transfers to the communities and workers in the coal value chain. In conclusion, honorable members, it is our collective responsibility to ensure that the people of South Africa are cushioned from the dire consequences associated with just energy transition, including job losses in carbon-intensive industries. Our transition must be geared towards advancing our national interests, not hinder the country's pursuit of its socio-economic objectives. So, in brief, what we are saying, the myth that we're about privatization, we're about offloading everything, that is not what we're in. We must reduce carbon emission and move to low carbon emission. Thank you.
Long live the chair.
Long live the minister.
Thank you very much. Now is the turn for Honorable Madokwe of the EFF. Honorable Madokwe.
She's covered, Chairperson.
Let me hear it from
Aye. Wait, we're not
Honorable Madokwe.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm here.
Honorable Madokwe, I'm sure the other members are tired of listening. Honorable Madokwe, over to you.
I'm here, Chairperson.
Yes, you can take the platform.
Thank you, Chairperson. It is conclusively illusionary for the speakers from the ANC to deny the obvious and open fact that the unbundling of ESCOM and approvals of IPPs is a form of privatization of power generation in South Africa, especially when they themselves have acknowledged that the implications of said action, which is primarily the financial benefit of profit-driven private sector at the expense of service delivery. In actual fact, the ANC's energy policy is completely disengages the state from energy generation and thereafter transmission and thereafter distribution. To refuse to accept that the ANC is privatizing the electricity value chain is ignorance or foolishness or both. The EFF's conclusive view is that the South African government should pay maximum attention to clean coal technologies because it is not immediately possible. And there is absolutely no way that we will abandon coal energy generation in pursuit of something that has no scientific value. Additionally, the South African government should form partnerships with countries that have floating storage and gasification unit capacity, and then plug the hydrogen anchored FSRUs into the national grid in order to resolve our energy problems. Lastly, South Africa should adopt a fiscally neutral approach towards the inclusion of nuclear as a source of energy. Our country must enter into a build, operate, transfer partnership with the Russian Federation's Rosatom and build additional 6,000 megawatts, which will solve our energy crisis. The neo-colonial cooperation and partnerships signed by your president in COP26 and COP27 are not a solution to our energy crisis. Without electricity, the economy will collapse, and when the economy collapses, our people will be plunged into absolute poverty and conflict. Just transition essentially means a transition to new forms of energy and electricity sources without compromising the job and economic activities. And what the ruling party is doing is not a transition and certainly not just. There is a blind rush to close coal power stations without alternate plans. The carrot the ANC is dangling, claiming that there will be no ghost towns and coal mining economies will be protected, is as imaginary as the carrot they once dangled when they claimed we have a state-owned mining company, only to find out it is just a mere company that is busy with coal tenders. We need to accept that it is not possible and not practical to transition in the manner, pace, form, and direction set by government and the global capitalist forces. We acknowledge the minister's agreement with this and hope the rest of the ANC, including the state president, who gets excited by international media and makes suicidal and nonsensical commitments, will also agree to it. With South Africa's energy and unemployment challenges, there is no reason the government is not pursuing clean coal technology, and all recommendations made above as part of the energy mix to ensure energy sufficiency, reducing our carbon emissions, and protecting jobs and our economy. In conclusion, the jab on EFF members' qualifications, by the way, is the lowest blow. The ANC should not even be tempted to go down that route. This side, we do not have fake doctors, nor do we have people that are paying lecturers to admit them into qualifications they do not apply for. And we'll gladly supply our qualifications, unlike some of you. Thank you, Chair.
Sure, Commissar.
Yeah.
You
Thank
said
you very
nothing.
much. Honorable members, that concludes the debate. Thank you very much for the session.
No quality.
Long
Thank
live
you.
the chair.
Chairperson. Well done. Long live the
Long
chair.
live the chair.
Chairperson, you didn't advise us. Must we leave or must we wait for the
No,
next session?
No,
thank you
wait.
very much.
No,
Thank
wait.
you very
You
much.
see, MC with qualifications. You see,
Honorable
we
members.
just tell you that you don't have qualifications. You see,
Honorable members.
you are subjecting us to this mediocre.
Honorable members, order.
Don't start with
Honorable members,
qualifications. Don't start.
We now proceed to the second order of the day on a motion that was sponsored by Honorable D.R. Dureko, reflecting on the state of coalitions in local government and the need for principles of deepening a healthy political administrative interface, good governance, quality service delivery, and good financial management practices. I now call the Honorable Dureko.
Malbongwe.
Thank you, Chair, honorable members, ministers, and deputy ministers who are present. The ANC motivation in sponsoring this motion was a conscious decision to allow for political engagement on this matter, where the public have expressed a deep unhappiness about it, the one of coalition government in the local government spheres. All political parties in National Assembly have experience of this, and in initiating this debate, we are seeking to engage with other political parties with whom we have to form coalitions, depending on the situation, what can best be applied to bring about greater stability. Unstable coalitions have a very negative impact to our communities because it's result to a municipality that is dysfunctional and unable to provide services to our people. From the first democratic local government election in 2000, we have had results that have produced the so-called hang councils or municipalities. The deep difference is that the numbers since the 2021 local government elections have increased from the one of 2016. And this is an indication of a deeper challenges that we are for. Coalition requires cooperation between coalition partners to ensure that the responsible councils are carrying out effectively. However, in practice, coalition government mostly have been unstable and terminated before the end of its term. Instability in local government coalition have severely impacted and compromised the municipalities' ability to adopt budget, policies, bylaws, and appointment of senior managers. It raises a bigger question about the level of political maturity between political parties. Party policy is, of course, a major factor, even though all parties will want to claim that they always put the interests of the people first. However, we have also witnessed extreme diverse political parties coming together who don't share the same ideological orientation, even though they have tended not to last. Our historical experience is that there has only been one coalition government that have lasted for a full 5 years, and that was the one of the ANC-led municipality. So what is it that holds the greater prospect for stable coalition? Currently, there are no guidelines for coalition other than what SALGA has developed in 2021, which are not binding but assisting, and there is no regulatory framework that exists at the moment. The history of a problematic coalition government in municipalities cannot solely be attributed to lack of framework for coalition government that can be used as a guide by political parties in struggling their coalition in practice. Often, it has everything to do with what particular political party wants to get out of coalition, size of a political party in a coalition, and of course, the subjective factors of political insecure individuals who assesses a coalition in terms of subjective factors, not objective conditions, and therefore, at first point of disagreement, political stress in a coalition starts. So what is it that the ANC is proposing? Our point of departure is always based on our philosophical orientation towards the matter at hand and what the problem statement is. Therefore, in whatever we propose, it must be advanced on the basis of principle. The absence of principle leads to a breakup of coalition grounded around narrow political party interests. Coming to terms with not winning at the outright majority is an act of political maturity and respecting the electoral that their will has been expressed, even if it does not sit well with the interests of a particular party. State is governed by a governing party, not as an end itself, but governed and managed as an organ of the people. This means that the well-being of the people, their needs and their aspirations needs to be of what is guiding the decision of coalition within the context of the Constitution, municipal legislation, and regulations. The principal approach means that any coalition needs to be, at the outset, should be clear as to what is it that it needs, how are they going to build local government democracy, their priorities in terms of service delivery, a principal program of inclusive local government development, and ensuring strict accountability to the electorate for the structures that have already been created. Given that funds for local government derive through the revenue, the division of revenue and the equitable share, apart from internal revenue generation, where that is possible, A coalition stance towards implementing government program is primary, since the money from national fiscus is appropriate for such programs. Any coalition that is put together around those who aspire for personal benefits or a personal relationship, a common occurrence will fail and should be avoided. It's better to be principal opposition in this regard than to go into a coalition that has self-serving interests, which may initially hidden, but break out at the first hurdle. Bottom lines must be established upfront and should not emerge based upon the issue at hand. Collusion agreement should be made public, since those who have voted for a party have a right to know what their party is entering into. At the outset, who desire to enter a collusion should be able to articulate framework and rationale for coming together. Any party that cannot do this will not survive collusion and end up destroying it. In collusion and taking a fractional nature of a number of political parties, there should be a basic level of trust if a collusion is going to last. Where there's no trust, the collusion will never last, because those who are in collusion will always treat one another with suspicions. The human factor in collusion, cannibalizing themselves, often has to do with the human factor, and no regulation or framework of intention will be able to deal with this matter. Linked to this is a political immature stance that may parties take to govern at all costs, whereby even if you can see that the service level agreement between the coalition is not what exactly the people need, but you just enter into collusion at all costs. What happened in these cases is that communities become alienated to those parties that they see and experience as having more self-interest to govern than accommodate for the sake of a progress and development. Another political immature stand is the one of dominating and dictating, especially where the bigger party is concerned towards a smaller party. These are the seeds of the destruction of a collusion, as we have seen them of so often. Mechanism on how to deal with the differences and disagreement are essential. The absence of this can lead to a collapse of a collusion. Collusion as a basic tenet must be formed on the basis of a written agreement containing as much policy and structural details as possible. Organized structures in the collusions are necessary, because if we don't have them, we'll end up in a situation where everyone will want to do everything that they want to do at any time, despite the fact that they need to work together as the parties that are into collusion. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Direko. The next speaker is the Chief Whip of the Opposition, Honorable Khakube.
Chair, as the South African democracy matures, voters are increasingly realizing the power of their vote. For the past 5 years, this has signaled the end of the ANC majority in many parts of the country. This has meant that the ANC has lost grip on major economic hubs in most provinces. This party that used to be a political giant is only a shadow of its former self. The residents of Cape Town, Nelson Mandela Bay, Tshwane, Johannesburg, and most recently again this week, Ekurhuleni have rejected the governing party. They've done so because the ANC has long forgotten what service means. It is riddled with its own internal politics, a bun fight for positions and perks. More importantly, the party has broken towns and cities in every corner of South Africa. The state of local governments through the years of neglect and rampant corruption has led us to this point. But the fate of the ANC is nothing to gloat about, because you see, its failures in government have come at a tremendous cost to the people of South Africa. Lives and livelihoods have been lost. The dream of a better life has long been forgotten. The hope of a capable state that places people at the center of its business has long been destroyed. So this is a lesson for all of us who have been trusted to govern in coalition governments by millions of South Africans. Coalition governments must be bound together by a common set of values and goals. These governments should be stable. They should be intolerant of corruption that robs people of critical services. This is why the DA has reached out to all political parties that are represented in this House with our proposed legislation that would go a long way to stabilize coalition governments. We did this because we recognize that the real victims of unstable coalitions are eventually end up at the hands of the ANC are the citizens. Legislating for coalition governments will ensure that we insulate people from the whims of greedy politicians, and so stability becomes critical. The DA's legislation would ensure that coalition agreements are codified and that they are binding to parties, preventing the instability that we have seen to the detriment of residents. It will introduce an independent arbiter that will manage and implement the coalition agreement separate from the politics, apolitical and independent, like we have seen in Kenya. It would introduce electoral thresholds and while ensuring maximum representation as envisioned by the Constitution. It would seek to amend existing legislation to regulate the frequency of motions of no confidence and instill stability in councils, legislatures, and perhaps in this very parliament. Passing this legislation is beyond our individual interests as various political parties. It is about investing in the future of a hard-won constitutional democracy. There are organizations across the country who are prepared to pull up their sleeves and jump in to save South Africa from utter ruin. It is imperative that this institution provides the legislative framework that will allow for this. Even in the hurly-burly of politics, some moments do call for us to reach across party lines to ensure that Parliament fulfills its constitutional mandate and responds to the issues facing the people that we serve. Coalition governments are here to stay, whether the governing party is willing to accept this or not. It is therefore our responsibility to create stable and service-led governments through the legislative powers that are vested in us all. Thank you.
Honorable Khahube. I now call Honorable Mkhalipi.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. The fact of the matter is that politics of coalition have always been part of South Africa. Political sphere since the transition of a democratic dispensation. We have always had some form of different political parties coming together to put together some form of governance. This is not only in local government, but it has been the case in provincial and national government. The first democratic government at a national government was made up of ANC, the murderous and racist National Party, and Nelson Mandela included some ministers from other political parties, as well as members of Inkatha Freedom Party. In KwaZulu-Natal, after the IFP failed to hold on to power of the first provincial government, they had to go into coalition with the ANC, including in municipalities. The ANC and NNP had coalition in the Western Cape in 1994. Even here in Parliament, Member Kornov, who's a councillor to the President Ramaphosa, is also a beneficiary of such arrangements. As a country, we have been doing coalition, and by its nature, politics will always require us to talk to one another, engage in agreements and trade-off, even if we do not like each other or always agree. Coalition politics are not unique to South Africa, but are practiced all over the world. Voters do not always vote majority, and that is a sign of majority democracy. We were recently invited to go to Denmark by the Danish embassy together with other political parties on a study tour about political party coalition. We learned three things. Number one, coalition politics works. They work if people are concerned about the citizens and service delivery. The Danish put their egos aside and think about water, they think about electricity, and they think about healthcare, education, sanitation, and safety to agree on coalitions, something which were on the struggle. Number two, coalition politics works because of regular and transparent consultation, including consultation on matters that appear small. Lastly, coalition politics works when political parties have credible leaders. We cannot have leaders who sit around the table and reach an agreement only to go and do the opposite. House Chairperson, let's come to the state of coalition in local government. Before we look at the state of coalition, we must first acknowledge that local government is in crisis. Municipalities have collapsed. Secondly, majority of municipalities do not have viable economic activities. As a result, coalition politics becomes about patronage. Now let's come to coalition. The reality is that there is no political party that has tabled a practical and believable plan that will make coalition politics to work except the EFF. We just witnessed in Ekurhuleni Metro that it was the EFF that had credible. We have reached an agreement, and because the ANC does not have credible leaders, the EFF is not in government when there was an opportunity. The narrative, Chair, that the ANC rejected the EFF in Ekurhuleni is not true. The reality is that the ANC does not have credible leaders. They reach agreements today, and tomorrow they backtrack and renege on their decision. Coalitions will not work if we continue to tolerate leaders who are not credible or racist. The EFF has maintained that we are open for engagements. The DA, and in particular Helen Zille, continues to insult us for no apparent reason, calling us names, but we are still ready to engage them because we care more about the poorest of the poor, not the egos of individuals such as Helen Zille. Coalitions will work and will remain with us for a very long time. So far, the EFF is the only political party that has presented a practical and believable plan. We take a government and you hold us accountable, Ekurhuleni, and we vote for you in Johannesburg, and we hold you accountable. It's simple as that. Thank you much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mkalipi. The next speaker will be the Princess Buthelezi.
Thank you, Chairperson. The political whirlwinds encircling the socio-economic and political spheres of our country clearly indicate that the days of a single political party securing an outright majority are over. This is being proven time and time again as the ruling party strongholds are being overturned. The era of coalition politics is upon us. However, such an era will bring its own challenges in respect of how quickly we can all adapt to this new age of South African politics. This whilst ensuring that not only the continuation, but moreover, the improvement of service delivery and the quality of the lives of citizens. There is a misplaced perception amongst parties that the creation of local government coalitions is an indication of political weakness. This has resulted in political parties in coalition municipalities competing for increased power. This only negatively impacts the people dependent upon those municipal councils, seized with having to defend legal proceedings, the limited funds and intellectual resources that should be deployed for service delivery to the people are instead focused on political and legal battles. The IFP has conducted various research trips to countries that have been able to successfully implement the coalition politics model, such as Germany. Coalition governance at the local level should be regarded as an opportunity to collectively do more for communities. As seen in other examples, coalitions need to be able to transfer different interests, such as needs and desires, over and above material needs and wants, into one strategic political plan. Intra-party compromise is something South African politics has not yet mastered. However, one cannot insist on a singular position alone. There needs to be the maturity of negotiation and compromise. The possibility of coalition governance is no longer hypothetical, as we are part of the transitioning political climate of our country. Whilst being mindful of the spheres of governance and the expressed need for greater provincial and local governance autonomy, We would be in favor of the Minister of Corporate Governance and Traditional Affairs working together with the provincial and local government spheres to start creating a standardized and uniform framework for coalition governance best practice. I thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Mulder.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. Good afternoon, colleagues. The Freedom Front Plus welcomes this debate, and I think it's very important that we do have a debate dealing with this issue of coalitions in South Africa. The mere fact that we are having this debate is a clear indication that our political landscape is changing, and it's changing in a dramatic way at the moment. The days where one specific party, namely the ANC, had a clear majority, those days are over. We are moving into coalition governments now. It was interesting to listen to the Honourable Dereko, in whose name this motion is, and she spoke not about coalitions, but she spoke about collusion. And I was thinking about that, and I had a look at the definition of collusion. And if you look at the definition of collusion, it says secret or illegal cooperation or conspiracy in order to deceive others. Now, some of these coalitions where some parties are involved exactly fits this definition, unfortunately. It's also not correct to say that the only coalition that lasted in the past was an ANC-led coalition. That's not correct. There were other coalitions. I can mention just one in the South Cape called Hesekwa, which the ANC had nothing to do with. It was a coalition between the Democratic Alliance and the Freedom Front Plus. That coalition also lasted for 5 years. We are here to understand that coalitions have come to stay. That's going to be the reality, and it's because of our constitutional dispensation. Our constitution says that we will have a multi-party democracy. Our constitution indicates that we will have a proportional system of government, and that absolutely will always lead to a multiplicity of political parties that will lead us and take us into coalition governments. If you look at the topic of today's debate, and I'm sorry to say unfortunately it's a wish list, because none of these things that are expressed in the topic are part of the reality in South Africa. Whether it's a coalition government or whether it's the one-party government, in most of them, let me not generalize, but we don't have a deepening and a healthy political administrative interface. That doesn't exist. We don't have good governance in most. We don't have quality service delivery, and we don't have good financial management practices. And unfortunately to say, we all know what the state of our local government at the moment is. Most of those governments, with all due respect, have been run into the ground by the ANC. And now we will have to take coalitions on board to try and rectify that, and we are busy with that. Let me just mention quickly, and there are many other lessons to be learned from coalitions and the reality in that sense. I'm going to mention just 4, and I'm speaking in general terms. The first one is very important. It says the biggest party in a coalition, and it can always be any political party depending on that specific coalition. The biggest party in a coalition should be the humblest of all. Why? Even though you may have the biggest party in the coalition with more numbers than the others, your more numbers will mean nothing unless you can retain the support of other coalition partners regardless of their size. A second lesson, ideally spoken on local level, coalitions should be negotiated and be established and managed locally with as little involvement on the national level as possible. National structures may set certain broad principles, but if you want effective coalition governments, they should be negotiated locally and managed as well. Third point, personal relationships between individuals in those councils are quite often a basis that can build understanding between politicians and the different political parties, and it's absolutely essential to succeed. A last lesson, less and more stable political parties in a coalition is preferable to small fly-by-night parties built around one leader or a few individuals, and that we see in many of the coalitions where one member parties have a balance of power, and it creates absolutely havoc. Last point, Chairperson, we need to improve our legislation to make possible to have more negotiation time when we go into the 2024 election. We're going to have a coalition in that regard. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mulder. Honorable Thring.
Thank you, Honorable House Chairperson. After the 1st of November 2021 local government elections, the electorate of South Africa was presented with 66 hung councils. the ACDP notes that none of the competing parties managed to obtain an outright majority in these 66 councils. And this has necessitated that coalition governments be established in order to fast-track service delivery to the residents of the municipalities in question. Clearly, the electoral dominance of the ANC has come to an end. And this is supported by the outcomes in the 8 metros, where the ruling party only managed to receive an outright majority in Buffalo City and a majority of 1 seat in Mangaung. It is the view of the ACDP that the electorate have spoken. They are tired of cronyism, corruption, incompetence, cadre deployment, infrastructure decay, and poor to no service delivery. It must be noted that where the ACDP is a part of coalition governments, such as in the metros of Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, and Tshwane, it has always been on the basis of good governance and strong political administrative systems, effective, efficient, and transparent financial management practices, and quality service delivery. Our MMCs in Nelson Mandela Bay and Johannesburg have proven their worth as servant leaders, putting the interests of the voters above personal and political self-interests that sometimes dominates the political landscape today. To underscore this point, the ACDP has not demanded MMC positions where it felt that our newly elected councillors lacked the experience or the skill for the position. Coalitions may have some downside risks, but where they are set up effectively, present with many opportunities to root out corruption, fraud, irregular and wasteful expenditure. In addition, the combined strengths of coalition partners can be put to good use to bring about effective and efficient service delivery. In conclusion, Honorable House Chair, the ACDP has long maintained that in order to effect good governance and strong political systems, transparent financial management practices, a non-partisan, independent, and professional civil service is required. And this includes the space of local government. The ACDP remains committed to quality service delivery and the interests of communities within or without coalition agreements. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Tring. We proceed to the UDM. UDM, the ATM, the ATM, Honorable Brink of the DA.
Thank you, Chair. Of all the problems that the constitutional negotiators in this country foresaw in 93 and 96, unstable coalition governments was not one of them. The system of proportional representation was meant as a safeguard against the abuse of a dominant party. The only coalition that Cyril Ramaphosa and Rolf Meyer contemplated back then was the ephemeral government of national unity. It probably didn't occur to them that proportional representation would sow the seeds of a European-style system of negotiated coalitions. But less than 3 decades into this new democracy, that is now the political reality of most of urban South Africa. And it will probably be the reality in this parliament after 2024. It falls to us then to ensure that democracy outlives the dominance of the ANC. When people vote for change and when circumstances demand change, our constitutional system must be capable of facilitating that change. This is incredibly difficult in situations where power is fragmented between scores of small parties and government can be brought down at any time by a motion of no confidence. In these instances, mayors do not have the time nor the power to land their manifestos in government, and the outcome of democratic elections can readily be reversed. This is what happened in many of the coalition and minority governments that were formed after the 2016 and 2021 local government elections. After 2016 in particular, ANC mayors or administrators were brought back to power when smaller parties were persuaded to reverse the change which they had in fact brought about. And there are many examples of this, from Nelson Mandela Bay to Tshwane to Johannesburg. And even after 2021, this trend continued, in part because our laws were not written with successful and stable coalitions in mind. In each one of these instances, parties who held the balance of power disregarded coalition agreements and then somehow brought the ANC back to power. It was never about service delivery or better value for ratepayers' money, always about jobs or tenders, or now so-called power sharing. And this is how coalition politics becomes kingmaker politics, and how coalition agreements are transposed by blackmail and bribery. The DA has proposed several reforms to stabilize coalitions and then to ensure that they can deliver on their democratic mandate. Of those changes, one is to reduce the disruptive power of kingmakers by introducing a threshold of representation. And most proportional representation systems around the world have such a threshold. The other proposal is to limit the frequency of motions of no confidence to 1 or 2 a year, a change that can be made to the Municipal Structures Act, perhaps without a constitutional amendment. These changes will not completely eliminate instability or even take the dynamism out of politics, but it will give governments time to deliver on their mandates and to build an alternative to one-party dominance. In conclusion, Chairperson, it's just important to note that this debate was started before Tanya Campbell was re-elected as mayor of Ekurhuleni with an increased majority. And so we understand that less prominence.
Thank you, Honorable Brink.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We now proceed to NFP. Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you, Chairperson. That's the 4th one for the day. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Chairperson, coalitions, whether we like it or not, is going to be the order of the day in the elections to come. The question is, are we ready for coalitions? The answer is an emphatic no. Then the question is why we believe we are not ready. It is because political parties put their own interest first, then the interest of the very voters that voted them in. Now, what is the problem we're having with some of the coalition governments? Selfishness, greed, corruption. Remember, we're after the resources. That is why you would find political parties will want to dictate who should be the municipal manager, who should be the CFO. This is exactly what is happening. So it is not the interest of the people, but that of the party. And when you don't get what you want, or when you enter into a coalition government, and 3 months down the line, you're not getting those tenders and things you were hoping that you're going to get to sustain yourself, then the political party you went into bed with is no longer that sleeping partner. You don't want them anymore. That is what it is all about. Now, how do we expect, Chairperson, political parties with different vision, different ideology to go into coalition in the interest of the people and survive? If one has got a communist ideology and another one a capitalist, how on earth are you expecting them to survive? It's not going to happen. I think what must happen is, and I know that it is being exploited, particularly by political parties that have the edge, the bigger political parties. They tend to swallow the smaller political parties. And we know there's very little respect smaller political parties enjoy from bigger political party in coalitions. But what is very important is that these parties, when they get together, they should be able to ensure that they put the interest of the people first. And that is why I say, Chairperson, you know, if you separate politics from administration, half your problems are over, because they won't be fighting about the money anymore. because the interest will be serving the people. Now it is about who's going to get their hands on the cookie jar. That is what it is all about. So in order to save these coalitions and make sure they are successful, I promise you even the opposites can work, but take away this edge that they have in control of appointing who the CFO, who that I can assure you, Chairperson, that negotiations.
I can assure you, I don't want to fight with you about time. Thank you very much.
I wish it would improve in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. COPE? Anyone from COPE? The next speaker is Honorable Kasa of the ANC. Honorable Kasa.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. In reflecting on the state of coalitions in local government, one recurring theme comes up each time we are faced with the collapse of a coalition: management of coalitions. Management of the political relationships between parties in coalition is supposed to be a political art that few are able to master. Mastering this art will take us a long way in ensuring that we have relative stability in coalitions. By management, we mean the political management of personalities who lead parties and often conflate their subjective will onto organizational decisions. Political management is an acquired art that evolves through experience, ability to distinguish between primary and secondary matters, and an ability and vision to understand the end point on any matter and how to keep parties focused on the essence and not the phenomenon. If we that have been successful since 2000, since coalitions are not a new phenomenon, political maturity, ability to accommodate, and ability to remain guided by principle and the people's needs have always assisted. So what has changed? If we have been managing coalitions since 2000 in local government, certainly the political economy of the country since 2008, a major impact on the lives of the working class in particular. Since 2013, we have not been able to record economic growth except here and there. Local government has steadily been seen to be the resource from which individuals and communities can derive an ability to survive. In this process, the legislative framework has become an obstacle, especially to those who wish to accumulate. In this process, mobilization has not necessarily been around needs of the people, but needs of this group of individuals who wanted to pursue their interests. In this scenario, good local government policy and this legislation becomes undermined by a subculture that sets in, whose intention is not about the people's needs, but about access to power and resources. The dissolution that we have experienced in voter turnout today, there are more unregistered voters or registered voters who don't bother to vote than those who go out to vote, and the gap is widening. This is a reflection that the electorate are alienated with what they are experiencing at the sphere of government that is meant to address their needs based on sound government policy and legislation. Outlining the challenges post-2016 local government elections and a trend that has continued in particular after the 2021 local government elections, 5 issues stand out: that of governance and administration interface, syndicates of corruption and individual corruption and political killings that are used by organized formations, whether they are in the form of political parties or pressure groups, to destabilize municipalities in order to force decision through coercion. What many parties cannot accept is that coalition governments are a product of the people's will in democratic systems. Their lack of overwhelming or outright majority confidence in any single contestant is an election itself. The political party coalitions and coalition governments that results out of this are largely unstable or changeable. And so in response to trying to manage this situation, we turn to amending legislation and regulations, usually the Municipal Structures Act, to deal with the challenge instead of using existing legislation to deal with the challenge. Political parties themselves conducting introspection of their own shortcomings. In Parliament, this is what we have done. We have excluded an entire category of political leadership from holding office in local government. And we believe that this will sort out the problem. So as we will hear in this debate, the Structures Act is under consideration for further change. Coalitions are by definition not permanent governance institutions, yet stability and cooperative, constructive governance can be optimized. Policy action is most needed in the domain of party politics and political culture, a terrain that does not lend itself to regulation. A political culture that does not treat coalitions as substitute for electoral contests need to be ingrained. We require principles to underpin coalitions, informally negotiated, binding, and publicly released agreements. Public political accountability on the content of coalition agreements will assist communities to hold individuals and their parties to account, and this needs to be encouraged rather than behind the scenes negotiations in which eyes are on the budgets, positions, public goods, and an atmosphere where personal gain is conflated with party political gain or interest. Political challenges and aspirations for individuals and collective enrichment remain two sources of huge instability that these have got to be addressed in a principled approach to coalitions. Therefore, managing coalitions must be on the basis of established principles that must manage how parties manage their disagreements in coalitions. Forming coalitions on the basis of written agreements containing as much policy and structural detail as possible is essential. Anything else will lead to a demise of the coalition while disagreements begin to rise. Party political interventions in council administration has to be contained. Work has been done on this, but more needs to be done to deal with the subjective and vested interests of groups that surround councils and want to extract material benefit from these councils. We have to ensure that we insulate municipal management from coalition interference in line with relevant legislation. On appointments and dismissal, this will go a long way to assist with stability, ensure professional autonomy of municipal bureaucracy, and don't make the appointment of a municipal manager contractual. This results in instability, especially when a coalition ruptures. with regards to caucuses, political management of caucuses is vested in the whip of that caucus. The whip has party interests only and desire to politically manage those party interests. They should not allow themselves to be undermined in this duty, otherwise things will fall apart. Of course, the party has the responsibility to elect whips of integrity and honor, otherwise coalitions will suffer the consequences. Parties, therefore, have to instill leadership over caucuses to avoid coalition switching under the cover of secret ballots, which lead to further instability. In this regard, motions of no confidence, the Council rules needs to regulate this on the basis of consensus that has been reached. Clearly, abuse of motions of no confidence is undesirable, but these matters are steeped in the rights, and therefore any agreement should not limit rights in a manner that will be constitutionally challenged. Narrow political purposes with criteria should be part of any agreement. It is, of course, it raises the broader question: do you put this in regulations as a schedule to the Structures Act so that one does not experience variation in municipalities, threshold in local government, and the instability it causes does need to be addressed, but within the constitutional framework of what constitutes reasonable constitutional proportionality. Proposals that threshold that lead to considerable exclusion are unlikely to meet the approval of the Constitutional Court. In conclusion, all parties need to ask themselves the question: what has made coalitions unstable? Is it really the absence of legislation, or is it not inability of political parties to manage coalitions? Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Sasa. Al-Jama.
Thank you very much, Honorable House Chair. Honorable House Chair, Dr. Kuni Mulder is spot on that coalitions are here to stay. But what is evolving is co-governance. Al-Jamal learned from the EFF that credible leaders is key to coalitions, and I've learned a lot from the speech of the Honorable Kalipi today. What she says is exactly what is happening in the city of Johannesburg. The co-governing minority bloc, which Al-Jamal provides secretarial service to, has replaced the DA Speaker and the Chief Whip. This bloc shows the benefit of EFF leadership for the future of co-governing in South Africa going forward, unleashing prosperity and service delivery. This bloc has seen our credible leaders of the ANC responded to help remove the Speaker and Chief Whip. What is working is that members of the bloc hold one another to account for the benefit of the residents of Johannesburg, and their party comes second. Even the ANC in the city of Johannesburg embraces this. The silver bullet, of course, is that the members of the bloc embrace revolutionary values and they embrace Ubuntu. So as one of the leaders, the one-man party leaders, Honorable Mulder refers to, we have two councillors in the ward council after we trust the DA. I look forward to working with the EF national leaders and the credible ANC leaders led by the provincial chair. So in 2024, the three parties that will govern will be the EFF, ANC, and the bloc of credible leaders of parties with just one or more seats, which obviously the nightmare of Honorable Bunda, Alden Zille, and others. The legislation the Honorable Chief Whip of the opposition party refers to will not get off the starting block. We died for one man, one vote. The PAC stalwarts were hanged. Every vote must count in the National Assembly. Thresholds is anti-revolutionary. The Concord gave independents the right to stand as councillors. The DA now says independent person must be more than one person. They can't even count properly. We must teach the DA how to count. So what is the nonsense about an umbud to babysit coalitions? We need the opportunity to put a motion of confidence whenever it is needed, and our speaker has given leadership to accommodate us. The DA wants to reintroduce apartheid, return to white rule, sharing power without control. They want to keep the white madams in power. So we want to put the case for co-governance. And Al-Jamaa feels that we need to put whatever resources is there. And South Africa is going to be proud of the co-governance in the city of Johannesburg. The new speaker there and the new chief whip
And let's
has
be
won
proud
the
of
admiration
saving
of South
time.
Africa.
Thank you very much.
Honorable House Chair, and I hope you support co-governance.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, the Honorable Hadebe.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, Honorable members, good afternoon. It is indeed a great honor and privilege for me to be able to address the House in debating the state of coalitions in local government and the need, which we have all emphasized, for principles of deepening a healthy political administrative interface, good governance, quality service delivery, and of course, good financial management practices. Some of our members have already alluded to that local government elections since inception in 2000 have produced quite a number of hung councils, which is what we called them then, contrary to a language of coalitions of today. The local government elections of 2000 produced 29 hung councils. It increased to 31 in 2006, and it peaked to 37 in 2011. The difference in 2016 was, for the first time in history of local government, 4 of the metros had an undecided vote, which hung councils or coalitions, meaning 40% of our citizens in the country were living under municipalities that are hanged. And it generated a huge interest, which actually provided a spinner to the difference of 2000 to 2016, a 15 years, 3-term of local government, which had produced beyond what 2016 had in terms of 27 hung councils versus 37 hung councils in 2011 elections, for example. Of course, the foundation of 2016 created the 66 of 2021 that we had now, including still the same metros which were hung. The Constitution vests legislative and executive authorities in the municipality to reside with council. And this effective exercise and rights for them to govern is crucial for capable and a developmental local government that we all aspire. As the highest decision-making body, they must steer the municipality, they must determine its strategic direction, and they must take crucial decisions. So in a coalition, this requires close cooperation between the partners themselves to ensure that the responsibilities of council are carried out effectively. Of course, in practice, this has been the opposite. They are often unstable and have been terminated mostly towards the end of before the end of the term of their council. And this instability relates and directly give an output of what Honorable Sheikh Imam indicated, lack of service delivery and a compromise in a municipality that needs to adopt its policies. In some instances, it's the IDP, and in some instances, even difficulty to adopt their own budgets. So the premise and the compromise for municipal administration's ability to deliver, unfortunately, Honorable Imam, is hindered by this very same instance. Even though you may want
Deputy Minister, we are losing you. Deputy Minister. Deputy Minister.
Advice and expert.
Deputy Minister.
To that council. And this has been the experience. But
Deputy Minister. Deputy Minister.
Okay. Coalition.
DM. I think we have lost the Deputy Minister. Deputy Minister, you are muted. Can you please unmute? You
Chair,
are muted.
I didn't mute myself. Can I switch off my camera with your permission?
Yes,
Maybe
I wanted to advise that.
Will be better. My apologies for that. I had not muted. But as a result, coalitions are unstable, as I had said, and I've illustrated that the history of this problematic coalition, therefore, has necessitated a program that COGTA has started on trying to develop and assist municipalities to develop the legally binding framework for coalitions that can be used as a guide for political parties in structuring their coalitions in practice. There are arguments, even of scholars, as to whether this must be a guide or it must be legally binding even beyond the parties themselves. Honorable members must remember, local government is the only sphere that is constitutionally instructed and mandated to engage with their communities to define and approve their own budget with regard to the services that they receive. And we call this plan Integrated Development Plan, which unfortunately take a backseat in municipalities which are under coalition when they are developing their own interest, and even set it aside in order to deal with their own bargaining power on over who gets what, even in exchange of programs, in exchange of contracts, which the parties or political parties in negotiating a coalition contracts enter into. A study which has been done in 24 democracies over the world indicates that, for example, in Norway, in Belgium, Italy, Switzerland, they've reduced the number of policy changes as a result of having more than one party governing in a government. We need to ideally look forward to this. If a IDP has been adopted at the beginning of the term, which is a 5-year, it's a 5-year plan, which yes, can be reviewed on an annual basis, but not ad hoc for no reason because of a change of leadership. In Nelson Mandela Bay, in the term 2016 to 2021, they changed their allocation of human settlement to an extent of never building a single RDP for the residents in that, because it was just changes of location from one point to the other without really utilizing the budget. Whoever comes in, he changes, he plans a new settlement. The one who comes next, he plans a new settlement. When he starts to implement, another one comes in. But our problem is that these agreements are mostly vague. They translate into a program of no government. They're usually not tailored to the needs of the people. It is now evident that we need to be able to remove all the cracks of what could make a coalition frivolous, but rather to be straightforward. But true to some of these arrangements, which have quickly become a norm, we were warned by a book called Marriages of Inconvenience by the Institute of Strategic Reflection, MISTRA. It said there are no goals in these coalitions, there are no visions, there are no plans, but worst of all, there are no programs. They operate on a stop and go mode, and this is what tends to accentuate the problem in the political administrative interface. Forstein's research also confirmed that the extent of turbulence in metropolitan administration is demonstrated by comparing the average tenure of municipal managers, which is usually 3 years, 3.5 years, compared to 15 months of MMs and the record of what they service in 5 years. That's where our problem is, Honorable Imam, in the administration. So we need to find a way in looking on how all the areas which are in the municipality and political parties govern. Rhodes University senior lecturer summed up our 2021 coalition negotiations as a ANC sideline, a DA surprised, and a demanding EFF, close quote. The talks were filled with unscrupulous manipulation by small, unrepresentative, smaller parties. Some of the smallest parties said it themselves. Coalitions incentivized promises which are beyond service delivery in fighting in council. And this has led Honorable Kasa to COGTA now looking, as we had said, into the improving of the Municipal Structures Act to create an electoral threshold where a party will be required to secure a predetermined percentage of the overall vote to qualify for a seat in a council. Yes, bigger parties must not be arrogant, but you also would want to go, for example, to Tabazimbi municipality, which is a 20-seater council. Party A wins 11 wards, and the other party win 1 ward to collect the 12 wards, but the other party, which is a dominant party, is sitting in a coalition party, making a total of 9 parties to govern on a 13-seater. And that coalition can't even adopt a budget because it is too big, it is not manageable, but it is based on the point that others must not govern at all costs. That is also not correct. It's an inability to make appointments and adopt budgets, which makes some of these crucial coalitions not functional. We need to enable the amendment of the Structures Act further to look into the cases which were tried before in KZN and Western Cape, which gives the MEC a right to institute Section 12, but further expand by allowing the MEC to look into expanding of the 14 days of the council establishment, particularly in a hung council, to give more time for negotiations while administration continuing with the business of council. But if the option of coalition fails, the MEC must be given a time to expand on giving the right of a party that has got majority rule, a majority number, to be able to initiate the discussion. That's what they also would have learned, those who went to Belgium, those who went to Germany, some of the countries which have always survived on coalitions, even for more than decades. The Dala Omar Institute of Law attests that coalitions must be strategic, must maintain a long view with the distributing political offices. We currently are seeing parties which openly say, I will not sign into that coalition if you don't give me infrastructure, if you don't give me human settlement, if you don't give me corporate services, so I could hire people who come from my party. That is what weakens the Section 79 and Section 80s because parties are inward looking. We also need to ensure that the motion of no confidence, as Chair has articulated, are also dealt with in the Municipal Structures Act. We are looking into enhancing further the development of the Chief Whip Code to ensure that the political parties are harmonized in council as a form of what is mandated, but rather not a duty that a council can choose to elect a chief whip or not to elect a chief whip. Our code of conduct, as it is being developed now, is to ensure that we legislate even on the walking out of council, which deals with the quorums, which makes council even more unstable in most of the areas. So the code of conduct for councillors, once promulgated, will prohibit council walkouts during council meetings, and it may also deal with the issue of quorums and stability of meetings sitting so that council could be able to deal with the issues and the business of council. Professor Peterse at West University says the whole new law to manage coalitions will be unrealistic and necessary, but agrees that arguably we need majority of executive mayors, majority of political parties. We need the ability to govern across divisions. Unfortunately, in South Africa, opposition politics seems to be sorely lacking in this. Even our own debate indicates
how we were
GM,
including one another.
the
Thank you,
time has
Mr. Chair.
expired. Thank you very much, Honorable GM. Honorable Malatsi.
Thanks very much, House Chair. This motion is an exhibition of a spectacular lack of political foresight by the ANC. There is no doubt that it was initially tabled with the intention to be a chest-beating festival following its short-lived efforts to remove DA mayors in both Joburg and Ekurhuleni. But as fate would have it, it has now become a major source of embarrassment for the ANC. So much that even the original sponsor of this motion, Honorable Hadebe, has now ducked like a skilled pest snatcher to dissociate himself with this motion. The miserable task of defending his party's political thuggery to collapse DA-led coalition governments has now been dumped on the shoulders of a hapless backbencher. Honorable members, the events of the last 2 months have exposed the desperation of the ANC to loot these metros. They are now collaborating with political gangsters in the Patriotic Alliance to return to power by hook or crook. In Joburg, they were dazzled by the tantrums of the Queen of Chaos, Pauline Makhubele, to launch what is probably the shortest political coup in history, only for the courts to restore the DA-led coalition to power. In Ekurhuleni, the ANC had one mission and one mission only: to disrupt service delivery by disrupting a coalition government led by the DA without a tangible plan to establish a functional government. All these failed attempts to return to power in these metros reveal the true character of the ANC. It does not care about service delivery to residents. Its primary obsession is to regain access to municipal funds so that they can pay salaries for Lutuli House staff and for the 2024 elections campaign. We now know that the ANC is so broke that it now plans to charge the media to cover its national conference. On the other hand, we have the DA that remains faithful to working with political parties who share our values to form coalition governments that deliver to all residents. And for as long as we are in power, we will strive to keep the taps running. We will collect House Chair.
May I advise that you switch off your video for internet connection?
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you very much. For as long as we are in power, we will strive to keep the taps running. We will collect refuse on time. We will clean neighborhoods consistently, and we will account for every single cent we spend to improve the quality of life in these metros. To our coalition partners who have remained loyal to the spirit of the coalition agreement to restore a government that delivers, we are grateful for the opportunity to continue to serve with them. And to the people of Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, Tshwane, and Nelson Mandela Bay, we want to reassure them that the DA-led coalition government will serve diligently and with honesty. The reality is that coalition governments are here to stay. And to the honorable member from Al-Jama, the reality is that if a threshold is introduced,
thank you, Honorable Malatsi.
Figure that auctions their soul to
Honorable Malatsi, thank you so much. Thank you very much. Your time has expired. The very last speaker on this debate will be Honorable Direko.
Thank you, Chair. The matter of formalizing coalition agreement has risen sharply in this debate. The ANC would agree that formalizing coalition, given the experience that we have gone through, it will be important. This will require the introduction of guiding policy in the formation of coalition, which outlines the guiding principle and approach to coalition. Delegated legislation should be sufficient as opposed to legislation. Legislation is less flexible and accommodating and likely to result in further litigations. A broad regulatory environment best suits coalition to enhance stability in council. Further, the preference for a coalition should be towards having more executive committees, principle of proportional representation to be more inclusive and improve stability compared to mayoral executive, which enhance weak coalition partners, particularly in large municipalities, such as grade 1 and grade 2 categories. Details of formalizing coalition agreement to guide the formation and operational function of coalition should be outlined in the modus operandi of coalition. Above all, a coalition must be grounded on principle, the purpose of why we are doing it, what is it that we want to achieve, which is to advance the well-being of our people and better their life for all, not the interest of the political party. Out of forging a coalition on a shared perspective and a program of action, that will become easier. Corporate government should be tasked to craft regulations on coalition and have it gazetted. Chair, in conclusion, some of the reason why coalition is failing is because of political parties like DA. When we are discussing issues that are affecting the lives of our people, they tend to miss the point and try to score a cheap political point. We are now discussing the issue of coalition, and all that they could think about is speaking of ANC instead of the matter that is at hand. So I feel sorry, Honorable Chair, for Honorable Malati. He must just have a session of tea with the former members such as Van Dam and Mayman, because they started just like him and now they ended up in the street frustrated because of the DA. That's how they do. They use you and throw you out. So he's on the line. While he's busy spending, he must also remember that. Lastly, Chair, we also have the EFF, whom are the black sheep of the family, but they behave like the cream de la cream of the organization, telling us that we don't have a credible leader, which is very worrisome because when you look at the EFF, they only have one leader. Others are just the followers, but they come here and constantly telling us about credible leaders. What is it that they know about credible leaders? Because they are followers. It's a one-man show. So there's no democracy in that organization since they behave like this when they get this platform. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Well done.
Honorable Direko. Honorable members, that concludes the business of the mini-plenary, and the House is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Long live the chair. Well done, Direko. Long live the chair. DA anibuyi nina kumasipala. Ngeke nibuye.
Thank you, Chair.